Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this day. Pray you bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. It's hard to be grateful in Columbus, Ohio after the debacle yesterday. I was working on my update, and so Pam taped it for me, and I don't think I will go back and watch that one. It sounded very ugly. I don't even think we won. I don't even think we won the fight at the end, right? So anyway, let me go back here. I thought I was at the beginning of my slides. So today we're going to talk about the ripple effect. And it's interesting when we talk about the convergence of all these different events. I talk about these, and I did a talk called At the Appointed Time. As we get closer to this, what we would call the midnight hour, things are going to accelerate, they're going to converge. The logistics that, prevent some of the things from coming about will be coming together. I think, I use these chess pieces. And this week, a lot of these are in play. Turkey, Russia, Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, Israel. And I could make chess pieces for a whole bunch of other people. And we're seeing a lot of you like the little turban on the Hezbollah and the turban on the Iran? So, and the onion dome on the Russian one too. That's I don't know if you're impressed or you're mocking me now. And then this is my wheel of prophecy. Sometime I'm going to just come in here and just start reading from some of these things. Now I've got to hang on here. Oh, here we go. Hang on a second here. And I broke my iPad. I don't know how that happened. My wife's sitting at home. She must have stepped on it. Oh. Well, I suppose I could have dropped it too. That's also possible. It must have been one of the great nieces or nephews when we were up at the Thanksgiving. So anyway, I'm going to read a passage of scripture for you today. Part of it relates to the four beasts in Daniel chapter 7, and I'm going to use the New King James. By the way, I know that people get really upset if I use New King James and everything. So let me just say this. I minored in New Testament Greek in college, and when I look at passages, Bible Gateway, by the way, if you want to go to Bible Gateway, there's a little icon there that you can click and you can add parallel passages. So what I do is I'll open like 4 or 5 different translations, like New American Standard, Legacy Standard, which I kind of like, New King James, and that type of thing. So, by the way, you couldn't read the original King James if I put it in front of you, because it was in a different kind of English. They've had to update it since then. So I know people are really tied to the King James, but I want you to know I'm very careful about this. I know that there are some differences. I know there are some issues, and I'm well aware of those. That's why I open up all the different parallel translations. I check the original text and everything. So let's just read through Daniel 7, because I think Daniel 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 are starting in 12 are going to start to come. I think we're on the verge of them coming alive. And by the way, Joel Richardson, who is a friend of mine, and I know people will disagree with him on some issues, but he's got a very good series right now that I think is important. It's called Fulfilled, Bible Prophecy Fulfilled. This is one of the things that we struggle with. And so there's some people that want to say, this is fulfilled, this is fulfilled, this has been fulfilled. And sometimes I think they're spiking the ball too early. I saw a videotape of a replay of a game recently where the guy's running down the field with the ball and he lets it go, but he's not at the end zone, and the other team picks it up and runs it back 100 yards for a touchdown. And I remember that somebody kind of spiked the ball in an NFL game when I was in high school, and I don't think we ever heard from that guy again. I don't remember him having a very long career. And so I think the same thing is true over in the Bible prophecy area. We have to be careful about spiking the ball too soon. And sometimes these prophecies have multiple fulfillments. And sometimes we don't know whether they're multiple fulfillments or it's just going to be fulfilled once. So the one that I'm thinking of is the passage that's used to reference to a coming Antichrist type figure, messianic type figure. One, it's in the Gospel of John, one shall come in his own name, and him you will receive. And so I think there's no question, but that prophecy had a fulfillment in Bar Kokhba around 133 AD. He was a messianic figure. He came in his own name. He deceived a lot of people. He claimed to be the Messiah. But then the question is that going to also be true? Is that also a prophecy for the end? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And then as I've talked, there's also this concept in Jewish prophecy and the way they've looked at it, that there is a pattern that will be fulfilled. And I've talked about the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau at the tomb of Machpelah, at the funeral of Isaac. And some rabbis say that is a picture of a final reconciliation between Jew and Arab. Esau marrying into the line of Ishmael, and therefore that's how the Arabs came about. And so it gets a little bit tricky, but just keep that in mind as we read through here, because I think you'll see some passages in Daniel 7 and 8, where it talks about this is for the time of the end. A lot of people want to come in and say, there seems to be a default that everybody wants to be a preterist. Preterist means fulfilled eschatology. It's already happened. And that's true with regard to some prophecy. It's been fulfilled. So in some respects, we're all kind of preterists. Did my mic just go out? Okay. And it reminds me of the time when we were watching a movie, and back in the days when we went to college, remember we had like one TV for one half of a dorm, or the whole dorm had one TV and you had to vote on. I remember we were down at the student union and we were watching a movie and the sound went out. And one of my friends said, "Did the sound go out on that TV?" And I went, and she's like, "Well, wait a minute, I can hear everything else going on." Made her think for a little bit. But so anyway, so this fulfilled prophecy. So I'd really recommend Joel, FAI YouTube channel. I think he's doing a very good job talking through some of these passages. And as I said at the conference recently in California, I talked about the millennium. And the millennium is that period of time that's been set aside for Christians to argue about the proper order of the book of Revelation. And then also, but at some point, I think we'll all be preterists, right? So we won't have this argument about, well, that's already been fulfilled. And I think that what is happening, there's a lot of people planting the flag on certain prophecies that I think it's just way too early. And I think they're going to miss out on a lot of things. That's just my opinion. So this is the vision of the four beasts, Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, "I saw in my vision by night, And behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, and each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till his wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, the second like a bear, it was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. We've never had a person like that in human history. I watched till the thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued forth and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming on with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. His kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. And then Daniel goes on to give a little bit of interpretation. I'm going to just read a few more verses. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth that spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. And so you can read the rest of Daniel 7. I'd recommend that you read Daniel 7 and 8 and start pondering a little bit what's going on. So we have this, there are a lot of things in the world right now that have a ripple effect. This is a cover, I don't know if this is there's so much AI stuff out there now that it's very difficult to figure out what's real and what's not real. So I'm not sure that The Economist actually put out a cover called Apocalypse. They did put out their annual predictive issue. It used to be called like The World in 2019, The World in 2017, and it would have this picture on the front. Remember back about 2019, and I'm going to go through this a little bit more detail in the next few weeks as I have time. Assuming like that, we could just like slow down World War and skirmishes everywhere. But in 2019, they had, I think it was 2019, they had like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse on their cover. And they were talking about how, if you looked at the details, it was like a prediction. They were making predictions and prognostications as to what was going to happen in the future. And some people think, well, they control everything, so that's actually, they're telling us what they're going to do. Maybe, maybe not. Here's the World Ahead 2025. You can get some of the images there. You got the electric cars, radiation, the head of the EU, Putin. I'm trying to count up how many get the hourglass. So things going up. Is that inflation? Is that the economy? Is that war? So there's actually videos out there where people are going through and looking at it. But so, for example, we had an election, Trump won, and a lot of things are changing. I mean, he is having, whether you like him or not, he's having a very big impact on geopolitics already. And so Trump comes along, makes a splash, and there's a ripple effect. And some of the ripples are very big waves, in my opinion. Same way with Putin. Putin does things, and there's a ripple effect. And I think this is what you're going to see with, and you can kind of see that in this passage in Daniel chapter 7. You also see it in Daniel 8, that these things happen, and it spreads out. There's a spreading out of the impact of all these things that are involved in Bible prophecy. So here's, for example, this was yesterday. Trump announced he's going to make Kash Patel the head of the FBI, or try to make him the head of the FBI. I'm not sure what the legalities are there. I don't know how long the FBI director is there. He does work for the executive branch. And last I read that the president is the head of the executive branch, so the president can control a lot of things. I'm pretty sure that, and this is not unprecedented in U.S. history, that on January 20th, all of the U.S. attorneys in the United States and a lot of the assistant U.S. attorneys are going to be fired. I believe Clinton and Obama also did this. I think Bush did it. It's just not that unusual, because the president is the head of the executive branch, which includes the Department of Justice. So there's been this myth, I think, that's grown up that the Department of Justice is somehow separate and sacrosanct and independent. And I don't see that anywhere in the Constitution. You're already seeing things with regard to the prosecutions against Trump. They're being dropped. They're being dismissed. Jack Smith moved this week to dismiss the federal cases against him. Now they're asking that the dismissal be without prejudice, which means they could bring it forward. And part of that is because the Department of Justice has rules in place that say you can't prosecute a sitting president. And there's a good reason for that. If you could prosecute a sitting president and you had a rogue people in the Department of Justice, the president won't be able to do anything. By the way, we're seeing that right now. I don't know if I have any slides on this. We're seeing that right now with regard to Netanyahu in Israel. Now, Israel doesn't have a constitution. I was going to say their government is organized differently, but that applies that it's actually organized. It does seem very chaotic. I was there 2 years ago when they were forming the government. We're over at the Knesset, everybody's running around, and the prime minister hasn't been selected yet, but the Knesset people are meeting and doing things and setting up committees, and it was crazy. And but believe me, they don't get along very well over there, and there are a lot of people that just absolutely detest Bibi Netanyahu. Some from within his own party, or at least that used to be in his own party, don't like him. But they're prosecuting him right now. Now, the Supreme Court, which I believe there is a need for, everybody in Israel believes that there's a need for judicial reform. Yair Lapid's party, Naftali Bennett, they all were for judicial reform until they're not in charge of the government. Then they don't want the judicial reform because they want to control the judicial reform. So the judiciary has become a very powerful branch of the government, and the attorney general in Israel does not serve under the prime minister. So they have gone to the court, and the court has ordered Bibi Netanyahu in some of these cases that have been pending forever. They were several years old when I was there 2 years ago, and I asked them, I said, how long are these things going to go on? And I was told 5 or 6 more years, because they use those cases as leverage to get Bibi to say, well, I won't do this, I won't do that. In other words, to control him in the exercise of his duties as a prime minister. It's a crazy system. Now the Supreme Court has said that in this one case, which the prosecution finished their case, and they didn't prove their case. In most courts in the world, that case would be dismissed. The case was not dismissed. Now Bibi has been told, you have to testify in that case. And the testimony is going to be like 7 or 8 days a month for the next year or two. I was an attorney. I can tell you, I had a big insurance case once. I was representing an insurance company, and this lunatic plaintiff's attorney was suing my client, and we had a broker and an agent. It was about a medical health policy. And despite my efforts to limit the time that he could spend, this was before the rules changed, he spent 60 hours deposing those two people. And I told him, I said, dude, there's no insurance agent no offense if you're an insurance agent, by the way, and this could apply to many other professions, but there's no insurance agent in the world, even when I'm suing them, that has 60 hours worth of stuff that I want to listen to. You know, it was like torture. So they're doing this to Netanyahu, and the Supreme Court said he has to testify, and I can almost guarantee you that the Attorney General is now going to go into the court and say that Netanyahu is disqualified from serving as the prime minister because he's tied up in court testifying. That's why in the United States we have the rule, don't prosecute a sitting president, to get away from nonsense like that, where the legal system is used as a political weapon. And everybody on the left, The Atlantic has a big article about Kash Patel, and Kash Patel's been talking about, some people say he's seeking revenge. Kash Patel would say, I'm going to prosecute people that need to be prosecuted for bad things that they've done so they don't do it again, so that people learn the lesson, with which I would be in favor of. So anyway, they just had so let's just look at a few other things. So they just had a big climate change thing. They had the Pact for the Future back in September that was enacted at the UN, all to push these sustainable development goals. And I think the Rubik's Cube of sustainable development goals is pretty good because they don't really line up very well. They're kind of complicated, but I think I've used this, but I can't remember. I do interviews and I use it. So if I've used this before, just act like it's brand new and fresh. So this was in the Washington Post, and I think this is appropriate because they just had the big COP29 meeting, the Congress of Parties to push climate change agenda. So and it's interesting how these things come about. So the Washington Post published this chart, I think it was late September or October. And what do you see on the chart? This is 480 million years. Now, I don't agree with the 480 million years, so you don't need to write me about that. But it shows the global mean surface temperature of the Earth over that 480 million years. And that comes out of an article. There was a big article that talked about it. And you can see that the Washington Post chart is very similar to this chart. And it comes all the way up until our period of time. And so the cooler, what do you see here? You see the cooler at the bottom, warmer at the top. And so what you see is for most of Earth's history, it's been fairly warm, especially when you get to the end of the chart, which is over here in 2024, where the line, if you extend that line back all the way, we're in one of the coolest periods of time in Earth history. And that's because I guess these ancient civilizations had, gas cars and steels and coal burning power plants, and there must have been billions and billions of them. So you can see though that the end of that chart is a very narrow thing. And by the way, this chart, if you look at it, it looks at like here, 485 million years ago, all the way down to 25 million, 10 million years ago. So this chart is talking about the fact of what's happened in this last 300,000 years. The temperature, global mean surface temperature of the Earth has gone up. The hockey stick. But look, look at it all the way over here on the right. Whoops. It's just gone up a little bit, and it's much cooler than most of human history. And even some of the guys like Michael Mann and those people who have been pushing this global warming, like Al Gore and stuff, he goes, well, that's kind of an interesting set of data. Well, yeah, it is, because it totally nukes, for lack of nukes, everything you've been saying. And so this whole thing is about control and agenda. Now, this is an article from Free Press, Barry Weiss, called The Debanking of America. This is from a month ago. And I'm going to just play a couple minutes of this clip, maybe 3 or 4. This is billionaire Mark Andreessen. Now, he's been in trouble on crypto and some other things, but he was on Joe Rogan for a 3.5-hour interview. You think I'm long? You can send your apologies and by the way, people like this long interview stuff. I mean, there's a guy named Lex Fridman. Have you ever seen his interviews? He'll do like 3.5 hours and he gets like 13, 14, 15 million views. No graphics or anything. People listen to, people want to learn. Why? Because they're not getting it from the mainstream media by and large. They're not getting it from their educational institutions. So here's Mark Andreessen talking about the debanking of America. Listen to this.
So look, this goes back to what we were talking about before. Like it is time to carve this government back in size and scope. It's time to take the overall, you can talk about distribution of taxes, but it's time to take the overall tax load down. It's time to take the spending down. It's time to get the government out of the position of deciding who gets money. It's time to unleash economic growth. Like
Elon explained that there's more agencies than there have been years of the United States.
Correct. Yeah, 450 federal agencies and 2 new ones a year. And then my favorite twist is we have this thing called independent federal agencies. So like, for example, we have this thing called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB, which was it's sort of Elizabeth Warren's personal agency that she gets to control. And it's an independent agency that just gets to run and do whatever it wants, right? And if you read the Constitution, like there is no such thing as an independent agency, and yet there it is.
What does her agency do?
Whatever she wants.
What does it do, though?
Basically, terrorize financial institutions, prevent new competition, new startups that want to compete with the big banks.
Really?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
How so?
Just by terrorizing anybody who tries to do anything new in financial
services. By the way, I think I edited all the bad words out.
Debanking.
I apologize if I did.
This is where a lot of the debanking comes from, is these agencies. So debanking is when you as either a person or your company are literally kicked out of the banking system.
Like they did to Kanye.
Exactly, like they did to Kanye. My partner Ben's father has been debanked.
Really?
We had an employee who...
For what?
For having the wrong politics. for saying unacceptable things. Under current banking regulations, here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off of your to kick them out of your bank.
What?
You're not allowed
But
to
what
have
if you're politically on the left?
Well, that's fine.
No,
because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Can you tell me what the person that you know did, what they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing, he's pro-Trump. I mean, he said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked it. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. By the way, you can't.
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So this is the thing. And then you go into this thing of like, well, this is where the government and the companies get intertwined. Back to your fascism point, which is there's a constitutional amendment that says the government can't restrict your speech, but there's no constitutional amendment that says the government can't debank you, right? And so if they can't do the one thing, they do the other thing, and then they don't have to debank you. They just have to put pressure on the private company banks to do it, and then the private company banks do it because they're expected to. But the government gets to say, we didn't do it. It was the private company that did it, and of course, J.P. Morgan can decide who they want to have as customers, of course, right? Because they're a private company, and so it's this sleight of hand that happens. So it's basically a privatized sanctions regime that lets bureaucrats do to American citizens the same thing that we do to Iran.
Whoa.
Just kick you out of the financial system. And so this has been happening to all.
Okay. So you can go listen to that. And it's a frightening article. I mean, it really, there are podcasts and articles, and we've talked about this, the truckers in Canada, a lot of conservatives that were protesting against certain treatments that were recommended by the government. And the government always says, well, we didn't debank you, the bank did. But you put pressure on them to do it. And then they're doing the same thing with speech. So even though there's a constitutional amendment, and then you challenge it, and the court says, well, we're not sure you have standing to bring that. And the United States government has done this to settlers. Those would be conservative Zionist settlers in Israel that are actually building in areas of Judea and Samaria, what our government consistently refers to as the West Bank. They don't want them to do that, so they go and they debank them. There's a developer that they just debanked this week. Now, look, I don't know if what the developer's doing is exactly correct in every instance. But the fact of the matter is, our government is shutting down the bank accounts of people in Israel that they don't agree with. And this is problematic to me, especially when your currency is the world's reserve currency, because you shut somebody down from their banking system in Israel with an Israeli bank, you destroy their life. You can't go to the store. You can't shop. And I've used the example of the one lady who got debanked. Her husband is an American citizen. She has 8 children. They're completely shut down out of the financial system. No trial, no determination that what you're doing is wrong. It's just that these lunatics in DC want to control everything, and they're using these tools. So whether you like Trump or not, if Trump gets a handle on that, that will be a very good thing. Even though he's probably going to make mistakes in other areas. And we've already seen some of that. So this is from the UK. Tighter rules. This is the Times of London. Tighter rules. This is the UK struggling with immigration too. People are in jail because they protested about a stabbing that took place in Southport. Now, there was some misinformation that got spread, but there were claims made that this person was part of a certain religion that advocates this, and the government went in and shut them all down, threw them in jail in very quick trials. Some for 2, 3, 4, I believe even up to 6 years. And by the way, now what's come out is that everything, well, you've heard of Tommy Robinson. He's in jail now over this issue. Might be in jail for 10 years. This is the country. When you go to England, go to the British Library, And you'll see the Magna Carta. You'll see all these great documents of liberty that are foundational to the liberty we have in the West, or think we have in the West, used to have in the West. Right there, and they're throwing people in jail. Up in Canada, I saw Ezra Klein. Did you see the videos of him? He went to a protest. He's Jewish. He went to a protest, a pro-Palestinian protest, pro-Hamas protest, and the cops arrested him because you're provocative, just your mere presence here. And these cops are like, I don't know where they're getting trained to do this. I can't believe it. They're not resisting it. So now in the UK, their immigration is out of control. And we know that this is a tactic of the left, right? So Starmer, the current prime minister, got up and he gave a speech, press conference yesterday about immigration and the problem of immigration. I just want you to listen to him and see how disconnected from reality he is, because we know that it's his political thinking that led to this. But anyway, here we go.
When we came into office, we immediately conducted an audit of the public finances, and we found a £22 billion black hole. Now, the Independent Office of National Statistics has conducted vital work on the state of immigration and found the previous government were running an open borders experiment. What the British people are owed is an explanation, because a failure on this scale isn't just bad luck, it isn't a global trend or taking your eye off the ball. No, this is a different order of failure. This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalize immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders. Global Britain. Remember that slogan? That is what they meant. A policy with no support, and which they then...
Okay, I really cannot stand that person. By the way, I have videos of him, I'm not going to play them for you, where he's supporting open borders. He's a communist, he's a leftist, and what's the rule of thumb? They will always accuse you of what they do. So now he's in there and they've got a big problem. So it's not like, well, we had nothing to do with it. I can't believe it. I'm here to save the day. And this is the old Hegelian dialectic. Now here's what the other thing that they're going on. These are current newspapers from the Times of London. Members of Parliament back assisted dying. And they have like all these people out there. You know, it's a historic bill. We're going to help people die. It's crazy. So this editorial was in the Times yesterday. Stay away. That's the White Cliffs of Dover there. Somebody coming across the English Channel. Cost of living and dying crisis here. It's very, very true and accurate. So let's go to the Middle East. I love this graphic of the Middle East. The spikes are population centers. So the taller the spike, the more concentrated the population. So you see here's the Eastern Mediterranean. You see the Sinai Peninsula, Red Sea, down there, Gulf of Aqaba, and then where the Suez Canal is. But look at Egypt, which is there to the left of the Red Sea, on the south side of the Mediterranean. 98% of their country lives within a few miles of the Nile River. So if they have a problem with the Nile River and water, they have a big problem, a very, very big problem. And now, there's the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. The GERD that's giving Egypt a case of collective national heartburn. Because they're building a big dam, they're filling it up. Even though Egypt has a big dam and they could release some of the water from their dam for a while too, right? It's not like, well, I could say something clever like it's a dam problem that they have right now, but people might take that the wrong way. I could just see that being clipped out. So then you can see where Istanbul is up there in the Black Sea. You can see along the, you can see Syria. You can make out the outline of the Euphrates River coming down into Iraq, that type of thing. And then up there near the Caspian, that's where Tehran is. And then that little peninsula in the Caspian Sea, that's Baku, very oil rich. That's where they had the global climate COP29 meetings just a couple weeks ago. And all the people were like, oh, we got to stop oil and gas. And now Germany's like melting down economically. Their energy costs are through the roof. Why? Because they've tried to put everything into renewables. Solar and wind. Solar and wind don't run all the time. If they don't run, you don't have electricity. You don't have electricity, you don't have heat, and that type of thing. It's just absolutely insane. So let's talk a little bit about the peace deal in the Middle East that's currently there. And you're going to see a lot of push over the next few months for peace. Peace in Ukraine, peace in the Middle East, peace here, peace there. Everybody's going to be involved in it. Even people that seem to be pushing wars like Putin, I just suspect Putin's going to be coming out. I'm going to do a program with Tom Hughes tomorrow. So here's Netanyahu. He gave a speech about the ceasefire with Lebanon. And so he talked about some of the problems. We've done a good job in Gaza, he says. And then he goes on, we're fighting Iran. We got to remove Iran. That's a major threat. He goes on, he talks about Judea and Samaria. They're having major problems in what the world calls the West Bank. They had a massive weapons store that was found in Judea or Samaria this week. They also up in Hezbollah, they found like fentanyl and other drugs that Hezbollah was going to use when they came across the border to overdose people, make them easier to kidnap and that type of thing. Syria, by the way, Syria's in, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Syria is one of the major producers of a thing called Captagon. It's like meth on steroids, crystal meth on steroids. And what it does, it's like a stimulant. And so these jihadists take it and they can go for hours. So there's a lot of thinking that these guys coming across the Gaza border on October 7th were taking Captagon. Syria makes like 80% of the world's supply of it. That's what really props up the Syrian thing. And then Netanyahu talked about the seventh front, talked about Hezbollah decided to attack us. They started on October 8th. They continued over the last year, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of missiles, over 10,000. The last war was in 2006. It lasted about 37 days. Israel has been attacking. They did 700 operations before they announced a land invasion back at the end of September. They had 700 cross-border raids. And they were building this infrastructure for years, 40 years. Now, talk a little bit more about that. Question is, why were they allowed to do that? Everybody thought they could manage the problem. And it didn't work out. So now the question is, what are you going to do in Gaza? How are you going to solve the problem of Gaza? 300 miles of tunnels. So, by the way, everybody hates Ben-Gvir, but sometimes he comes out with things that I'm sort of thinking like, tell me why that's wrong. And so he says, if people want to leave Gaza, let them immigrate away from Gaza. and we'll move in there and build settlements. Now, the world melts down over that. But 2005, under pressure from our government, Ariel Sharon government, took people out of Gaza. I know people that were involved in that. They lived there at the time. How did that go? Were there any tunnels in Gaza back in those days? I don't think there were. There were Jews living in Gaza. But the world said, oh, no, we've got to, this is what's crazy. We got to make it Jew-free. Got to get rid of the Jews. This sounds like stuff that happened in Germany. So a couple articles you want to read. This is a good article. I'm not going to spend time on it. This is Jonathan Spire in Friday's Jerusalem Post, Letter to Baghdad, a communication from Foreign Minister Gideon Saar to the UN Security Council ruffles feathers in Baghdad. And you can go read about that, because as soon as somebody from Israel says something, the UN gets their panties in a bunch, you know? Be careful, by the way, if you're in England and you use the term pants, that's not what you wear on the outside in England. I learned my lesson that way. I spoke at a conference. Well, anyway. So just tons of stuff going on in the Middle East. You got down here on the right, you got 14 to 33 cabinet ministers want the attorney general fired. They have 33 cabinet ministers in little tiny Israel. What do we have, like 16 cabinet posts or something? But what they do is they give everybody a ministry to get them to bring their party into the government, or 2 or 3 or 4. So Syrian rebels coming in, I'll talk about that in just a moment, and a truce between Israel and Hezbollah. So this is Israel Hayom, Israel Today, front page the other day announcing we've got this deal. And so you see the picture of the soldiers walking across a pedestrian bridge on the Litani River. And I'll show you a map of that in just a moment. The Litani River is about 10 kilometers north of the Israel-Lebanon border. South of the Litani River, they were supposed to, under Resolution 1701, there's supposed to be no military development. And what happened since 2006, when Resolution 1701 went into effect? They've been building everything that they can get their hands on. Well, there were UN troops that were supposed to stop that, right? Yeah, the UN troops are not very good at that type of thing. So this is what it says. This is a high-risk agreement that we've entered into. It's going to be good for 60 days. So do the math. What happens in 60 days? You'll be a few days into the Trump administration. So this was kicking the can down the road. I don't think that it's a good thing by any stretch of the imagination. Article here that I want to. Yeah, is that the one I wanted? Hang on a second here. So Tony Badron over at the Tablet magazine, he's written some great, Tony Badron, his Twitter handle is Across the Bay, and he's written some great articles. Here's some other articles. You know, Hezbollah violates the agreement, we can attack again. So Litani River, you see these pictures of them going across the Litani River. But the Litani River, by the way, in some places is it's less than 1.5 miles from the Israeli border, like up around Metula. So the question is, well, do you want they want to get everybody back to the north of Israel. 60, 80,000 people have left, and they want to go home. But one of the mayors, the mayor of Kiryat Shimona, which is up in that region, up near Dan and Metula, right on the border, the mayor said, we're not going back under this agreement. I mean, why would we go back to something when they've got rockets that can go 80 miles? Why would we go live 6 miles from them? That doesn't make any sense. We don't feel secure. And so now you see this big push everywhere. people talking about it, peace and security. And we know that there's some kind of peace coming. We know, like the red horse in Revelation takes peace from the earth. Now, some people say, well, that means there's peace, so he takes peace. So everything's at peace, and then the red horse comes along. And I'm not sure that that's correct. I know that what the red horseman will do is take all prospect of peace away from the earth. So there might already be war. I think there are probably going to be wars going on. That's just my view. So here's, UNIFIL's coming back, and we're going to have another 1701. Everything's going to be great. Here's the Litani River. You can see the blue line, the black squiggly line down here near the bottom. That's the Israeli border. And then that kind of red line at the top. Hezbollah is going to move north of that. And so how is Hezbollah reacting to this? They've been humiliated, right? They've lost probably 4,000 people. Their entire command and control structure has been decimated, particularly in some of their brigades or battalions that they were going to use to cause the most damage, go into Israel, kidnap people, kill them. Their plan was to meet up with Hamas in Tel Aviv. And their goal was to kill 1 million people, at least. Kill and kidnap 1 million people. Kill and or kidnap 1 million people. So you can see how far you see, like, then you have a 5-kilometer line, 10-kilometer, 15, 20. That's how far it is from the border, the Litani River. But you get over here to Metula, and it's only about 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles. So Hezbollah has been decimated. Their rocket firing capability, the concern, I remember I interviewed people from Alma, I interviewed Mary Eisen, and the concern was they were going to launch thousands of rockets a day, maybe 10,000 rockets a day. Right now, they're only maybe doing 200. That's 200 still is way too many. We wouldn't tolerate it here. But it's much, much less because Israel's done this phenomenal job in taking out a lot of facilities. In fact, I don't have the video on my presentation, but they took out a missile factory, like where they were building most of their missiles and rockets and that type of thing. They just dropped these 1,000-pound bombs on it and just destroyed it and obliterated it. So Israel's done fantastic. They've destroyed, they've taken down, like Nasrallah. That was 3 towers they took down in Lebanon to get Nasrallah. And they made by the way, he hasn't had his funeral yet, which is kind of unusual. That would seem to be a target-rich environment. Maybe that's why. But in light of that, you would think Hezbollah is humiliated, right? But this is the front page of Al Akbar newspaper the other day. Steadfast and victorious. We're winning. We made Israel's going to withdraw now, and we won. And so the question is, how do you beat them bad enough that they won't react that way? And the answer is it's pretty difficult. So here's Netanyahu, the bird of, this is from one of the Arab newspapers. Israel's evacuees fear going back to towns left behind. And then what do you see, though? You see these people coming back to Lebanon doing what? Waving Hezbollah flags. So Jonathan Spire has another good article. A ceasefire deal won't finish off Hezbollah. Nothing is confirmed yet, he says. This is in The Spectator. But it appears that a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah is imminent. This was written early last week, just about a week ago. The fighting, which began on October 8th, has claimed thousands of lives unless the Israeli-Lebanon border area decimated on both sides. But there is anger that Israel is rushing into an agreement that will not keep those who live near the Lebanese border safe. Community leaders in Israel's north have reacted with anger to the announcement of the proposed cessation in hostilities. They know that while Hezbollah's infrastructure along the border has been extensively damaged, the movement itself has not been destroyed. absolutely correct. But Israel's done a great job, but the job isn't done, and so a lot of people are upset. Here's an aerial, the black line. You can see that that's the border, and then you can see the blue line of the Litani River over to where it turns north near Metula. And now we have these, I appreciate Jonathan Spire a lot. He's a fantastic military correspondent, really understands the issues. I'm going to talk about Syria in just a moment. So in Syria, you have this crazy mix of people. You've got former ISIS that are against the government. You've got the government forces. You've got the Kurds. And it's just this horrible mix of things. And the question is, what's going to happen in Syria? What should we do? What should Israel do? What should the United States do? And Jonathan Spire on his Facebook page, somebody said, hey, they're asking me questions. What are we going to do in Syria? And he says, I refer all of my friends to Menachem Begin's unimprovable response when asked regarding Israel's position on the Iran-Iraq war. Namely, we wish great success to both sides. Because there's no good people involved in the fight up there in Syria right now, as we'll talk about that. So here's Jonathan on the quad at JNS talking about the problem. How did we get to where we are? He's going to talk about the war between the wars. You know, Israel's going to manage the problem. And the answer is, how did that work out? So here's Jonathan interviewed on JNS the other day.
I think the biggest difference, which it seems to imply, is that Israel now has the potential for extending what used to be called the war between the wars. Remember that? In Syria, now to Lebanon also. In the past, when Israel conducted the war between the wars, it conducted it only in Syria. And it appears there is now a chance for the same Syria rules to be applied to the weakened Hezbollah south of the Litani in Lebanon. Will that make, in my estimation, a cardinal difference to Hezbollah's ability to rearm? Sadly, I think it probably won't. After all, let us remember, the war between the wars, and let us be clear on this, was a failure. It was a failure.
Explain to us a little bit what that
means. Sorry, yeah, the war between the wars, or campaign between the wars, the Mabam in Hebrew, was the campaign conducted by Israel in the years preceding the current war, in which Israel carried out, if you remember, weekly or sometimes nightly bombings in Syria of efforts by Iran to supply Hezbollah with weaponry. And what we've now found out from October 8th, 2023, is that for all the efforts expended, Hezbollah was very well armed, including with the weapon systems that we'd been told we were trying to prevent. In other words, the war between the wars, and let's not put too fine a point on it, was a failure. It blew up lots of stuff. It killed lots of bad people, which is, of course, good. But it didn't stop Hezbollah and Iran getting to where they wanted to be on October 8th, 2020.
Yeah.
We've now, of course, set back that capacity enormously. But obviously, there's now a ceasefire. So we're into a new reality, something resembling the war between the wars. Is this likely to work differently because it may now be applied in Lebanon as well as in Syria? I'm not convinced. And I think if you look at the wording so far, we're aware of at least of the letter and of the task of the new enforcement mechanism. What it seems to be saying is that Israel, if it perceives an immediate danger, can act immediately to neutralize it. But anything more than that, it needs to go through the enforcement mechanism in order to act. But of course, the danger is not going to be an immediate danger. Rearmament, by its very nature, is not an immediate danger. It's a danger set for the future. So it would seem to me that there's a considerable likelihood that Israel will not find itself having freedom to act in carte blanche south of the Litani. It'll need to go through the preferences of the Americans and the French and the Germans and the British. And I would suspect, given the different interests of those states, that will not result in the kind of intensity of action necessary to prevent Hezbollah's rearmament. What I can say, even from my own experience, and I visited South Lebanon in 2007, a year after the war of 2006. I mean, I was there during the war as well as a soldier, but I was there as a journalist in 2007. And then accompanied by knowledgeable Lebanese friends who were with me, we could already see the telltale signs that Hezbollah had reimposed its civilian grip south of the Litani. And that's the nature of how it begins. First of all, they reimpose their unquestioned authority south of the Litani, and then they begin to build that up in terms of military hardware. Without any question, the civilian grip of Hezbollah will be rebuilt south of the Litani now in the coming days and weeks. And I suspect, I know that then the effort at rearmament and rebuilding will begin. And I suspect that the current mechanisms, certainly not the Lebanese armed forces, which, as you remember, is supposed to be the main instrument for preventing it, are going to be fit for purpose. So it's going to take them a very long time because they have suffered very, very severe and serious damage. But is there a serious barrier to their eventual rebuilding and rearmament, whether it's the mechanism or the letter from the Americans or the Lebanese armed forces or UNIFIL? My opinion is none of those will prove fit for purpose.
Jonathan, what's the American letter? Explain it to us, unpack it for us. What is in there that we didn't have before?
Before there wasn't any. Before Israel was entirely dependent on Resolution 1701 and the bodies established thereof in order, in terms of its of arrangements north of the border. That is to say, 1701 itself, and then UNIFIL and the LAF. And what the letter does is it's kind of a separate commitment from America to Israel, essentially saying that, America understands Israel's needs in this regard, and America supports Israel's right to prevent Hezbollah's rearmament. It's a general commitment of understanding regarding Israel's needs in this area, and it's new. Nothing like that existed before.
I mean, it feels like an extra layer of help from America above and beyond the committee. So it's saying, even if this committee thing doesn't work with the other countries, from us, you've got the carte blanche to do what you need to do.
And he goes on, they talk about the fact that Jonathan points out, well, it's just a letter. And how effective is a letter going to be in international geopolitics? Hey, we got a letter. So that's letter's 2 years old. Do you got anything recent to talk about this? So it's very problematic. There was also a committee issued a report this week in Israel. This is from Israel Hayom, a civil investigation committee. The government failed, and they really went after Netanyahu on that. And look, there's criticism that's valid. I've been following Alma research for years in Israel and other think tanks, and they were all saying, we got a problem, we got a problem, we got a problem. But they don't just have a problem in Lebanon, they had a problem in Gaza, they got a problem in Judea, Samaria, they got a problem in Syria. We'll talk about that in just a moment. They've got a lot of problems. They've got these 7 fronts, physical fronts. They also have an 8th front of social media, 9th front of, international legal system, and then a 10th front. Everybody's coming after them, and that's kind of prophetic. Now, this is New York Post yesterday. Joe Biden, or at least this person who they say is Joe Biden, went to a bookstore and he came out with a book. The book that he came out with is a book by Rashid Khalidi, a radical, anti-Israel, Jew-hating, Muslim, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian guy. Now, first, I think, so the question is he's, and this is what Carolyn says, let's remember all the experts who cheered for Biden and silence any criticism of the great Zionist. Daniel Greenfield, who you should follow on X, Sultan Kanish, I love that name. Biden doesn't read books. Being photographed with a topical book before announcing a new policy is the sort of stunt that Obama used to pull. The Obama people are now fully in charge, and signaling that they're preparing to go after Israel. It's going to be a tough month. And Tony Badram also put up an article. He's written some great stuff about the Biden-Obama Ottoman Empire at Tablet a couple months ago. And now here's his current article. Obama plays a dead man's hand in Lebanon and wins. Listen to just the first couple paragraphs. Barely 3 weeks ago, Barack Obama's legacy was in tatters. His party was roundly defeated in the election after he personally engineered the defenestration of his doddering former vice president from the Oval Office. Instead, and by the way, Carolyn Glick, Tony Badrin, all these other smart people, they think it should be called the Biden administration for obvious reasons. Instead of greeting the sight of Obama emerging from the shadows with relief, Americans reacted with horror. His handpicked candidate was trounced while the party he directed lost both houses of Congress. The Iran deal, which he once saw as his ticket to Mount Rushmore, would be consigned to the dustbin of history by self-proclaimed master dealmaker Donald Trump. And yet, 2 months before the end of his lengthy shadow presidency, 12 of the last 16 years, think about that, and faced with the final undoing of his signature legacy project in the Middle East, Obama went all in one big, by forcing Israel to accept a deal with Hezbollah that will formalize America's role as the terrorist group's protector. Obama will have locked in a key piece of his decade-old policy of leveraging American power to secure both Iran's continuing regional influence and its direct control over Israel's border. After nearly 2 months of operating in Lebanon, the Israeli cabinet agreed on Tuesday to the ceasefire deal brokered by President Joe Biden's special envoy, Amos Hochstein. The details of the deal are, for the most part, as irrelevant as they are meaningless. In essence, they represent a return to the October 6, 2023 status quo ante. Namely, that the Lebanese armed forces and the UN UNIFIL will again deploy in South Lebanon and again pretend to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, the meaningless 2006 UN. Do you get an idea where Tony Badrin's coming from? That he didn't really like this very much. My phone's heating up just reading it. Which supposedly prevents Hezbollah's rearmament and the reconstruction of its infrastructure south of the Litani River. To prop up this threadbare charade, the U.S. will now up its annual taxpayer subsidization of Hezbollah's base, reported by at least another $400 million to account for the enlargement of the Lebanese armed forces with new U.S. subsidized recruits. With these additions, U.S. taxpayer funding for Hezbollah land will now sit at around $1 billion per year, including a soon to open, if it hasn't opened already, $1 billion plus embassy in Beirut. Why did we build this big embassy in Beirut? Remember Amos Hochstein? He's running around. He's the energy guy. And he brokered that deal. Israel gave up some of its rights in the Eastern Mediterranean to gas deposits. And so, by the way, they brought the good. There is divine intervention involved in all of this. So part of those gas deposits were given to Lebanon, given to Hezbollah. So they hired a French company called Total Energy. By the way, the French are involved in this too. And that really doesn't give anybody a good feeling, right? But they've been drilling in the same areas that Israel's making all these gas finds, and all they're finding is sand and water. So there might be a little bit of divine justice there. So I'll try to remember to put a link to Tony Badrin, tabletmag.org or tabletmag.com. Tabletmag.com. Tony Badrin, B-A-D-R-A-N. Excellent, excellent article. You should read it. So here's how the Iranians respond. Okay, so now Syria's melting down. Everybody's fighting in Syria. It's hard to tell the players. So what you should know is they're all bad people. And as Jonathan Spire said, let's wish them all great success in fighting each other. Because you got the Syrian government, you got the Syrian Free Army, you got the Syrian Defense Forces, you got the regular Syrian army, and they're all different. Some are Sunni, some are Shia, some are Alawite, some are former ISIS. I don't know anybody good. So what does Iran say? Israel planned all of this in Syria. Oh, okay, so we're taking care of Gaza. We're taking care of Lebanon. And now we're planning this thing so that as soon as we get the ceasefire in place in Gaza, then Syria will start to melt down. They must think very highly of Israel, that they could plan and control all of those things. Netanyahu, by the way, Khomeini came out and said he doesn't want Netanyahu arrested, he wants him put to death. And as this Twitter account says, well, Khomeini just may have issued his own death sentence. So you've got the Syrian rebels, that's one of their flags on the left. You got the Syria government on the right. They've taken over Aleppo. It's from the Financial Times this morning. They've said they were pressing southward after taking over most of the country's second city, Aleppo, including its international airport. I think Aleppo, there have been a lot of people killed, 600,000 or more killed in Syria since the Syrian civil war started back in March of 2011. And by the way, how many protests are taking place at Columbia, Harvard, and Yale about the hundreds of thousands of Syrians that have been killed, let alone the millions that have been displaced, many of whom still live in refugee camps, some of whom are Palestinians. Have you seen one person march with a placard saying, "Free the Palestinians in Syria"? No, it doesn't happen because it involves Jews. So here's some Syrian fighters in Aleppo yesterday at a weapons depot. And they've taken it. I'm pretty sure Aleppo is the largest city in there. This is from Financial Times. And so the question is, so you've got the Syrian government. There are reports that Assad may have flown to Russia. He was in Russia earlier this week. They don't know where his family is. There was some reports of a plane leaving Syria, Syrian Air Force plane, leaving and flying to Russia because Russia has troops and that sort of thing in Syria. They've got an air base. They've got a warm water port up at Tartus. And so they want to protect that, but they're fighting a war too. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So here's 50 towns and villages. If you want to, Elika Laban, she's Jewish. She's a very good analyst. She's got a very long tweet. I'm not going to go through it. You can find it on Twitter at Elika Laban, not LeBron, Laban, for you Ohio people. Talking about what's going on in Syria. And so she talks about the different opposition forces that are there. Some of them are associated with ISIS. And I think she comes up with this conclusion: at this time, the situation is developing, and it's best to keep an eye on the moving parts. Overall, the opposition to Assad's regime is good. The empowering of Islamist groups is not. And that's what's opposing Assad right now is our Islamist groups. So now Trump's going to come in. He's going to, by the way, the big poster in Tehran now is they're making a hypersonic missile. And so this came out of the blue. I don't think anybody had Syria meltdown, Syria coup, or anything on their this week's bingo card. I mean, I just don't think anybody was figuring that square was going to get filled up. Iran continues to develop bomb-grade uranium cache. By the way, in the north, Erdogan has wanted to control that area. He wants to extend Turkey's border down to Aleppo. So he's involved behind some of these groups in the north. But he wants them also to keep the Kurds at bay. He does not like the Kurds, and he fights them at all stress. So he spoke at a religious council in Turkey, capital Ankara, the other day, and he said this, that the West's progress is built on blood, tears, massacres, and exploitation. This is a Muslim Brotherhood guy saying this. So you can add him to the list of people who will always accuse you of being what they are. Anyway, the West's progress built on blood, tears, and massacres and exploitation is temporarily, and by the way, he's still part of NATO, has temporarily overtaken the human-centered civilization of the East. A day will come when this era of progress, which excludes the sacred and humanity, will close as Western civilization collapses with a great clamor. Our human-centered and divinely inspired civilization will rise again, stronger than ever. And at this point, I will say, go back, read Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. I think the ram goat is Turkey against Iran that you read about in Daniel chapter 8. And I think that's coming. So Erdogan also said, this was just yesterday at another speech, humanity is at a crossroads. I think if we're at the end, Erdogan's a significant player. And you still have the ICC, the International Criminal Court, going after Netanyahu. And so this thing is totally bogus. Dan Senor at Call Me Back, great podcast. I would highly recommend you follow. And by the way, he's very good at getting views from both sides and not yelling at people and fighting and all that stuff. I really like his measured approach. So he had Natasha Hausdorff, the great British barrister, on the other day, UK Lawyers for Israel. She did it, by the way, she did a debate the other night. I'm trying to get a copy of it at Oxford Union about, is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? The smart people, supposedly these are the smart people in the UK at Oxford, the academic elites, they voted, I think it was like 290 to 70 that Israel was committing genocide. And they were almost unable to continue the debate because the students were yelling and screaming, just like the image we saw of the pro-Palestinian protesters shutting down the Macy's Day Parade, which was kind of interesting. As they're blocking the parade, you got Ronald McDonald balloon coming down the Fifth Avenue behind them. But anyway, so Natasha Hausdorff, she went through with Dan Senor why these things are illegitimate from the International Criminal Court. It's totally bogus. France even came out and said, well, we wouldn't arrest Netanyahu if he came here. But then Dan Senor asked her a question. Hey, Natasha, all this stuff, we've beaten Hezbollah, we've beaten Hamas, this stuff is illegitimate at the International Criminal Court. We're winning, right? So, here's his question and her response, which I think is very appropriate. This is about a 5, 6, 7 minute clip.
I want to talk about the long-term, perhaps irreparable harm this entire effort will have ricocheting back against the ICC itself. I've heard many Israelis argue that as horrendous as October 7th was, and as much as it has shattered Israel and Israeli society, and it was just, there's no words to describe the depth of the massacre, that it has backfired against Hamas and Hezbollah and Tehran, the regime in the Islamic regime in Iran, in ways that none of these actors could have ever imagined. If Yahya Sinwar on October 6th had been told that your attack against Israel is going to result in Hamas being completely decimated, your life ending, Mohammed Def's life ending, the leadership of Hamas being completely wiped out, and oh, by the way, Hezbollah, that quote-unquote ally you had up on Israel's northern border, that too will be wiped out. And its leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah, who's been in power for decades, will be dead. And oh, by the way, Iran's defenses will be completely exposed because it is going to result in Israeli military action, aerial military action against Iran. And in fact, some operations that penetrate Iran right on the ground, right in its government area in the in the capital, in its capital in Tehran. If you had asked Sinwar on October 6th that all this was going to happen to Hamas and its co-conspirators in the following year, I don't think he would have believed it. And what we are about to witness, some Israelis have argued, what we're about to witness is the legal version of that backlash against, instead of Hamas, against the ICC. That the ICC has overshot here, and they have triggered a response that I think you can already see. We're all focusing, and by the way, I am too. Like I'm guilty of this too in this conversation, focusing on the countries that are saying they're going to comply with these arrest warrants. But there are plenty of members of the ICC that have also said they won't. So the fact that members of the ICC, the corollary is the members of the ICC have said we're not going to participate and we're not going to comply, I think also chips away at the credibility of the institution. And I know the U.S., with the new administration coming in and the new Congress coming in, are talking about taking some very strong action against the ICC. So we could wind up a year from now, the ICC being a shell of itself.
Oh my goodness. I hope that you're right. But I have to say that I have witnessed decades that have led to this point. I remember there was an article in 2012 in the New York Times, which was written by Mahmoud Abbas, and it was Abbas's declaration of lawfare. He called for the internationalization of the conflict as a legal, not just a political matter. Now, lawfare is an abuse of legal systems, legal processes, international legal institutions in particular, when it comes to Israel. And it is a misuse of those processes to advance a particular political agenda. So it's not just the ICC. I hear what you say about this overreach and a potential backlash. I hope that might follow through and there'll be some steadying of the ship and maybe a return by the ICC to its proper mandate. But I have seen the developments across other international legal bodies, across the International Legal Academy, which have been, again, decades in the making, and across armies of so-called NGOs. So Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, their reports that seek to call Israel an apartheid state. I mean, all of this has ultimately been contributing to the weaponization of international law against Israel, and none of it is actually based on real international law. All of it is either inverting international law or, essentially accusing the victims of the very crimes that have been perpetrated against them. And I don't just mean South Africa's allegation of genocide, where Israel was the victim of acts of genocide Israelis were on the 7th of October, but also, the allegation of apartheid that I just mentioned. Where is the real apartheid, Dan? Because it does exist in the area that we're looking at. Because areas A and B of the West Bank are Jew-free. Gaza is Jew-free. When Israel withdrew in 2005, it ethnically cleansed that land of Jews. So, and also, colonialism, another pseudo-legal accusation that is being deployed against Israel. All of these legal terms, genocide, apartheid, all of the Arab world is Jew-free, and yet this allegation is directed at Israel, where there is a 20% minority of Arabs that live as equal citizens. I mean, all of this is utterly extraordinary, but outside of these exchanges that we're having, it is becoming the received wisdom. So it's not, the ICC isn't launching this initiative in a vacuum. And so far as the public debate, let alone the public intellectual debate, which has really run away with itself in this respect, so far as all of that is concerned, and we've seen what's happening at universities around the world, that backlash needs to be against far more than just the International Criminal Court if it is going to have any impact on bringing all of these legal discussions, debates, and processes back onto the straight and narrow, and if it is going to have any effect on preventing them from continuing to victimize the only Jewish state with this inversion of international law.
Natasha, I do try to end these conversations on a hopeful note, and I know you're saying that you hope I'm right. You remain a skeptic, but you hope I'm right that this will be the beginning of the end for the ICC. And I will just quote from quote from Mike Waltz here, Representative Congressman Mike Waltz, who is a congressman from Florida, has been very influential on national security matters in the U.S. Congress, and is the incoming national security advisor for the new Trump administration for President Trump. So he has the top national security role inside the White House, heading up the National Security Council. And he tweeted yesterday, and I quote here, "The ICC has no credibility, and these allegations have been refuted by the U.S. government. Israel has lawfully defended its people and borders from genocidal terrorists. You can expect a strong response to the anti-Semitic bias of the ICC and UN come January."
Perhaps I might also join you in that slightly more positive outlook. And I also hear from the US that the reinforcements are on the way, which was always very good to know. But I was recently actually on the ground in Gaza. In September, I went in with the 162nd Division and was witness to some of the challenges that they have been grappling with on the ground, but also importantly, the incredible progress. And it's not something that we usually hear very much about. You've referenced, of course, the achievements against Hezbollah as well as those against the leadership of Hamas. But what has been achieved in the war on the tunnels, the terrorist infrastructure that Hamas had spent 16 years building, embedding itself within civilian infrastructure, and the ability of the IDF to take precautions to prevent civilian casualties in a fashion which has been unprecedented in the history of warfare. All of this is an incredible achievement. I think it should make everyone extremely proud, and it bodes so well indeed for the future, not just of the IDF, but also of all Israelis who have stepped up, who have unified, and who have met these challenges in a way that I don't think we could possibly have imagined just over a year ago.
I second that. I appreciate. There we go. Now there's too much hopefulness.
Okay.
Too much hopefulness. We're bouncing back in a game of ping pong of hope.
Yeah.
Natasha Hausdorff, thank you for.
Okay, so listen, I'm going to skip the Ukraine stuff. That's a big issue, though, all the threats of nuclear war and the missile that they used. I'll cover that later. Hopefully we won't get hit by one of those things before it happened, before I talk about it. You need to pray about that situation. It's very delicate. Putin is mad. I came up with this graphic in doing some research this week, which I thought was kind of interesting. Some people are saying that Putin's really not in charge. People are controlling him. And the question is, the way that he decides to go will determine how human civilization survives or not. And this is an article that pro-Russian. So I'm going to leave you with this. So I talked about the ripple effect. You see the ripples. This happens here, and it causes this widening, this bigger ripple. And sometimes the ripple turns into a tsunami. So David Wormser, who's one of the best analysts in the Middle East, just wrote this article. It's over at the editors. If I remember, I'll put a link to it down here. It was Carolyn Glick just tweeted it. And I thought that this was very appropriate, just the title of it, for what we're seeing right now. Syria melting down, but then you see Erdogan making statements. And David Wormser says, this is the ripple effect. Prepare for the disintegration of Syria and the rise of imperial Turkey. China and Cairo move toward Erdogan as Iran recedes a newly threatening, fast-changing Middle East reality. I'll put a link in the show notes. You need to go read that. We'll talk more about that in the future. By the way, pray for Natasha Hausdorff. I was messaging with her this week about trying to arrange interviews. She's very, very busy, and she's very, very tired. So just pray that she'd have the strength to do this, because she is one of the well, I think I said this to her. I said, we'll pray for you, because there are certain people that it's like their whole life has been prepared for this moment. And you're one of these people that I think that this is your moment. So keep doing what you're doing. So hopefully give me an interview, but if not, plenty of videos out there. She is a tremendous advocate, as are other people. And the ripple effect, I think it has prophecy. This is what the Temple Institute put up this past week at their website. Is that coming? I don't know. So let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will help us to give us wisdom, Lord. Guide us with your Holy Spirit so that we can ascertain the times in which we live and then use this information as motivation to go out and share the gospel with people. Pray that you'll bless us this week. Give us those opportunities and watch over us. In Jesus' name, amen.